好
for
快
sermon.
去睇到傳道書嘅第10章。
So now very quickly we've reached the chapter 10 of the book of Ecclesiastes.
每一個人都好中意睇到啲細蚊仔嘅出世嘅。
Certainly people rejoice, when a newborn, a new infant, is born.
都恭喜Thomas 同 Annie 又做公公婆婆啦。
Certainly, congratulations to Annie and Thomas to become grandparents again.
細女前排1個月前生咗個 boy 啊。
So their youngest daughter, gave birth to a little infant boy about a month ago.
我哋睇 Marvel 就有 Ultraman 乜嘢都明佢哋又有個 Lowerman
Certainly, the story tells that, they have like a little bundle of joy.
如果我哋期望每個細蚊仔都能夠健康活潑快樂嘅成長，
If we expect an infant to grow up happy and healthy that way,
但如果唔係你咁理想嘅，要你揀，唔知你會點揀？
so unfortunately, if things are not as expected, how are you going to choose?
如果你生個仔係敗家嘅，
So let's say you gave birth to a boy who kind of is like a prodigal son.
成日用晒阿爸啲錢，
Certainly, spend almost all your money.
你想一個咁樣嘅仔啊？
Do you wish to have a son like that?
定你想要一個傻傻地嘅仔？
Or, you want to have a son who's a little silly, a little foolish.
第一嘅喜歡啲，第二喜歡啲。
So you prefer
你想
first
第一嘅舉
one,
手，
a
你想
son.
第二嘅舉手，冇得唔揀。
Yeah, one or two. Raise your hand.
當然啦，我哋冇兩樣都唔想要。
Perhaps you might say, yeah, no, neither. I don't want either one.
但係中國人有一句説話，
But certainly, a Chinese proverb says,
佢話寧生敗家仔。下一句係咩啊？
so someone said, it's better to have a prodigal son.
嗱，當然啦，講個個人都唔想生個敗家仔啊，係咪？
So nobody would want to have a son, who would be like a prodigal son.
Right. 嗰個講嗰個人嘅背後有一個嘅意識，有一個嘅觀念，我唔想個仔係蠢。
But certainly, what's behind this mentality that I don't want a prodigal son, would be, yeah, I don't want my son to be foolish, stupid.
我哋都就有信心，係咪啊？敗家嗰個睇下路加福音15章都可以希望佢回轉，係咪？
Perhaps a saving grace would be at least a prodigal son at one point in time, he would turn around and come home.
但係中國人就話人蠢就冇。
But certain Chinese saying that, when someone who's really foolish, then actually there's nothing much, you can do.
唔好咁蠢。
So don't be that stupid.
弟兄姊妹，你唔好睇你個仔啊，睇你自己，你蠢唔蠢啊？
So perhaps not look to your offsprings, but look to yourself. Are you one?
如果你將呢個問題去問所羅門，
So let's say you take these questions to King Solomon.
我估你一定知道所羅門會點樣答你。
Perhaps, you might guess, how King Solomon would respond to you.
因為所羅門係被譽為世上最聰明嘅一個人。
Because King Solomon, has been regarded as the wisest man on earth.
佢觀察世人一啲嘅行徑，一啲嘅情況，去體會到人裏邊好多嘅愚昧嘅事情。
Certainly, he has observed like lots of human processes and how they function, and his conclusion, have been, human beings, they've done a lot of foolish things.
所以佢去到神嘅面前祈求，去祈求神俾佢有智慧。
Therefore, he came upon God and asked God, "Yeah, I want to be a wise man."
上個月我哋睇傳道書第9章，我哋所羅門帶我哋睇人生裏邊會面對生與死呢個問題。
So last month we studied chapter 9 of the book of Ecclesiastes on the topic of life and death.
所羅門帶我哋睇人必會死，但我哋所以要好好去享受每一日嘅人生。
So King Solomon taught us and led us to think about people will die. All of us, let's enjoy each and every day.
因為我哋冇一個人能夠擔保我哋一日一定有明天，所以我哋要好好珍惜享受今日。
For, we have no guarantee that, we would have tomorrow. That's why we have to cherish today.
有人必會死，但係唔係放棄人生，而係積極把握每一個人生嘅機會。
And just because everybody would die, we should not just give up, but instead to actively seize every opportunity that offers us.
所羅門最後提我哋人會面對死亡，我哋要好用智慧去選擇我哋嘅人生。
King Solomon reminded us, yes, we will die, but we must choose our lives, with wisdom.
點解所羅門會咁樣建議呢？
And why would King Solomon, make these
延續第十章嘅時候，你會發現啊，所羅門用好多嘅篇幅去形容到愚昧嘅人生。
So in chapter 10 of Ecclesiastes, like King Solomon used quite, an extent to talk about, these two areas, these two topics.
冇錯，佢有生命，但係佢嘅生命裏邊活喺一個愚昧嘅底下，係好浪費。
So certainly, yes, we all have life, but certainly living a life under foolishness, that would be a waste.
所羅門亦都從幾個角度裏邊去提示我哋應該乜嘢係智慧嘅人生。
Certainly, King Solomon, from several angles, he reminded us what would be a wise life.
所羅門喺傳道書嘅第10章第1節裏邊咁話。
Solomon in chapter 10, verse 1, he said,
我哋一齊讀下 ，OK。
Let's read together.
死嘅蒼蠅使作香的膏油發出臭氣，這樣一點嘅愚昧能敗壞智慧和尊榮。嗱喺第10章第1節嘅裏邊咧，某個程度去做一個嘅引言，或者某個程度都係呢一章嘅裏邊一個嘅總結。
Certainly, verse 1, is an introduction, but that seems to be the theme, of the entire chapter 10.
所羅門話一個蒼蠅喺一啲嘅好香嘅香膏裏邊。
So here, he said a dead flies, would come to a perfume.
明嗎？本來好香嘅，好好嘅，但因為一啲嘅愚昧就破壞晒啦。
So in other words, like the perfume, should smell wonderful, but instead, because of these dead flies, that, it just turned foul.
本來我哋嘅人生好好嘅，但我哋唔好好智慧去揀選，我哋行錯路，我哋人生裏邊破壞晒啦。
So if, I like king our life, if something happened and if we were foolish, then, our life seems to be to turn to a disaster.
有好多人話啲唔緊要啊，係我嘅人生，我嘅揀選。
Some people might argue that, hey, it's my life, I can have a choice.
但係你唔好忘記嗰啲香膏臭起嚟嘅時候，你都覺得臭啦，係咪？
But certainly, let's see this perfume. If it turns bad, then perhaps it smells bad.
我哋可以嘅帶個榴蓮去飛機，你睇下會有咩後果？
So let's imagine if you are to bring a dairy and fruit onto a
或者
plane, and let's see,
你住apartment，你開個榴蓮可能有人報警添嘛。
So perhaps, you would open up a dairy and fruit and the entire, your neighbor in the condo, may call for help.
因為嗰啲嘅味會喺周圍產生一種嘅影響。原來一點嘅愚昧唔單止影響自己，影響你周圍嘅人，可能令你父母嘅擔心，可能令到你周圍嘅人係咪喺一個險境嘅當中。
So like, the bad smell, it will spread out. And if you live life with foolishness, perhaps then like your parents, your family, would also be affected.
保羅去講到哥林多前書第5章嘅裏邊講到一點嘅麵酵會令到全團發起嚟。
Just the same, the Apostle Paul in 1 Corinthians chapter 5, Paul said, don't you know that a little yeast works through the whole batch of dough?
哥林多前書嘅第5章講到喺當時嘅人喺佢生活裏邊好多嘅淫亂、繼母為妻，好多呢啲嘅淫亂嘅問題。
So in this chapter, 1 Corinthians, that, it talked about at the time, there was just a lot of evilness, a lot of malice and wickedness, that was happening among people.
可能嗰啲嘅人會覺得呢啲係我自己嘅個人嘅生活嘅抉擇。
Perhaps like someone would say, this is my life choice, and my own to make.
保羅去提醒當時嘅哥林多教會嘅人，唔係啊！你如果唔去俾嗰個價值觀出嚟，去糾正嘅時候，好容易你整體嘅裏邊都陷喺呢一啲嘅混亂嘅裏邊。
So Paul argued, with them at the time that, no, it's not only your choice, so like if you put a little yeast, then it will work through the whole batch of thought. Whatever your wickedness, will kind of like turn and affect like the whole of your life.
嗱，我哋經歷過 COVID 嘅時候咧，我哋會希望你仲記得或者明白一件事。
So perhaps like, let's take an example. I hope you still remember, this one thing.
當 COVID 嘅時候，冇事嘅，唔使咁緊張，係咪？
So remember, during COVID time, people would say, yeah, nothing bad is going to happen to us.
唔使封關啊，唔使戴口罩，啲細菌咪感染晒周圍咯。
So no shutting down of the border, or, you don't even have to wear a mask. Everything will be just fine.
仲記唔記得唔俾你出街買嘢？唔俾你出街去買餸嘅時候，仲要排隊。
Do you still remember the time that, even going to the supermarket to buy food was restricted? You have to stay home.
當你感染嘅時候，你要隔離。
So when you got infected, that, you have to be isolated in quarantine.
經歷過一個咁慘痛嘅經歷嘅時候，先至學到一個教訓。
So certainly, all of us, had come through, such a tragic and difficult challenge. Now, we are able to value what we have.
所以如果我哋唔小心嘅時候，唔去處理，用咗即係你 COVID 用咗幾多年啦，佢先差唔多先而家放心啲啊，係咪？都唔係咁放心嘅。
So let's imagine that how many years since then that, it takes us, to understand now we're more stable, have more support.
弟兄姊妹，當我哋喺當中學一個功課。
Certainly, there's a lesson to be learned here.
一個唔智慧嘅決定，唔智慧嘅觀念，可能換嚟一個可能極重嘅後果。
An unwise decision and unintelligent approach, could have like kind of brought about like a disastrous outcome.
弟兄姊妹
Brothers and sisters.
所羅門一開始嘅時候，要我哋留意，原來愚昧喺我哋嘅人生，喺我哋周圍嘅人生嘅裏邊，會帶嚟一個好 破壞性嘅影響。
So King Solomon reminded us from the get-go in this chapter that if you allow foolishness to be with you, it could have like brought about like disastrous outcome and consequences.
所以保羅喺以弗所書裏邊提我哋，你們要謹慎行事，不要像愚昧人，當像智慧人。
Like the Apostle Paul in Ephesians also encouraged us, be very careful then how you live, not as unwise, but as wise.
當我哋聽到呢一度，我哋腦裏邊會浮現究竟乜嘢嘅情況先至係愚昧？
Perhaps like up to this point, you might say, well, what does that mean to be foolish? What kind of qualities, is like foolishness?
如果我哋睇第10章嘅時候，你會留意所羅門係用咗好大量嘅篇幅，其實係形容到愚昧嘅唔同嘅情況。
So certainly in this chapter and Ecclesiastes, so quite an extensive like coverage of like what foolishness really encompasses.
我哋嘗試喺第10章裏邊唔係去仔細去睇每一樣，而係睇一個究竟所羅門勾畫咗乜嘢嘅情況，我哋需要去留意。
So in chapter 10, let's come together and really have a good understanding of what King Solomon described, as like being folly, being foolish.
所羅門喺第3節咁話，並且愚昧人嘅行路顯出無知。
So Solomon said, even as like a foolish person walks along the road, the fool lacks hands.
其實所羅門講緊乜嘢啫？
So what is he saying anyhow, you may ask?
行路可以睇到你點行法，你個人夠唔夠 smart？
So even like the way you walk and how you walk really reveals you're being wise or unwise.
行路喺日常生活裏邊，我哋每一日都會做嘅嘢嚟。
Perhaps we all walk every day, many times a day.
原來所羅門要帶我哋睇喺我哋日常生活裏邊，可能有一啲好基本嘅嘢，其實我哋都唔小心可能換嚟好大問題。
So Solomon said, there might be some really minor trivial things that we do every day that we don't even pay attention to, but it truly matters.
我唔知你有冇你細個嘅時候，你父母有冇咁樣話過你？
I'm not so sure when you were younger, your parents might have said something to you.
你點行路㗎？
Let's say, where are you walking? How are you walking?
你啲鞋爛得咁快嘅？
Well, how come your shoes, got broken up so quickly?
點解你行路唔係行嘅，左踢右踢嘅？
why you not walk, but instead you're just kind of like, kind of jumping around and horsing around.
唔知有冇人踢下踢到石頭，跟住整到自己啊？
And maybe kicking around so much that, you kick onto rocks and boulders and you get yourself hurt.
我哋細個阿媽肉痛嘅時候，覺得我哋真係好蠢嘅，咁樣咁快整爛對鞋。
So perhaps when we were little, our mother, would say, you're such a fool. Like, you see, you broke your shoes again so
我哋
quickly.
以為好醒啊，哇！咁我哋咪有新鞋着咯。
Perhaps to us, we thought, well, yeah, so what? It was broken. I got new shoes anyways.
俾咗錢買鞋，冇錢買其他嘢㗎啦，係咪？
Well, money spent on shoes, on new shoes, and there's no more money for other things.
可能喺所羅門嘅時代會睇到類似嘅一啲喺生活行路嘅好愚昧嘅情況，但係今日我哋會睇到乜嘢？
Perhaps during like King Solomon's time, there were people who lived foolishly, but how about us? How about today? How we live our lives?
你今日我哋揸車，你會留意啲人點樣過馬路？
Perhaps now, if you're a driver and you probably notice how people are crossing the road these days.
啲人係咁樣過馬路。
Exactly, people would be holding on to their cell phone
睇住手機過馬路嘅。
and walking with
以
their
前我哋
cell
過
phone.
馬路係左望望右望望，係咪？
So in the past, we were told, before you cross the road, you look to the right and then to the left to make sure that it's safe to proceed.
好多時見到啲人咁樣過馬路嘅時候，根本轉晒燈，佢都繼續去行。
So certainly we've noticed people, even though the lights, have changed, but people are still looking into
緊張你
their
點
cell
過馬
phone.
路啊？
So yeah, crossing the
記得唔
road.
好咁樣過馬路啦。
Please
知道
do
嗎？
not cross the
唔
road
係
like this.
對唔住喎，唔係細後生先係咁嘅喎，大都會咁嘅喎。
So perhaps it's not the little ones, but even like people of average age would still kind of like do things like that.
所羅門要帶我哋去捕捉，原來喺日常生活裏邊有好多嘅細節。如果我哋唔小心嘅時候，其實顯出一種嘅愚昧，到頭嚟你自己蝕底，或者害埋別人啊。
King Solomon said, there are little things in our life. If we stop paying attention to these things, that perhaps, our foolishness may lead to destructions and also affecting others negatively.
所羅門跟住去做咗好多嘅情況勾畫咗出嚟。
Certainly, King Solomon continued to outline some of the things that he has observed as a show of foolishness.
愚昧坐喺高位，富足坐喺低位，僕人嘅騎馬，王子就行路。
So here, verse 6 and 7, fools are in high position, the rich, occupy low ones, slaves on horseback, and princes go on slaves' foot like
帶
slaves.
我哋喺工作嘅生活嘅環境嘅裏邊，我哋會睇到有一啲唔妥當嘅情況。
So into our workplace, like some of these things King Solomon observed, he laid it out here.
作牆嘅裏邊有蛇咬翻你，跟住作石頭嘅裏邊你自己受傷。
So if you break a wall, like you'll be bitten by a snake, and whoever will work in cornerstones will injure you.
所羅門都提我哋，如果我哋喺職場裏邊唔小心、唔夠智慧，好容易自食其果。
So King Solomon mentioned in your workplace, if you stop being careful, that you might bring injuries to yourself.
好多時我哋喺工作裏邊咁上下，我哋即係你又唔做，佢又唔做，個個唔做，咁我學埋唔做，咁到頭嚟蝕底嗰個，可能係你自己啊！你好醒啊，你識學 AI 啊。
Sometimes at the workplace, we might defer work like to the others. And if everybody, were to do that, then certainly perhaps, the consequence would be destructive and hurting everyone in the end.
可能我哋成日個個都攞人便宜咁下蝕底，但係如果你裝備好自己，你自己裏邊係有可以工作嘅，炒嗰個最慢最遲嗰個都係你啦，係咪？
Instead of like being sneaky, and not like making shortcuts and not doing your work, maybe instead of like equipping yourself. So perhaps when layoff comes, you will be the first one to be let go.
喺工作嘅層面裏邊，留意我哋會唔會活喺一種忽略智慧嘅表現裏邊。
So perhaps while working in our workplace, have we kind of put ourselves, into these circumstances, that are nonetheless, by being foolish.
再者，所羅門用喺第10節裏邊講到鐵器鈍啦，若唔去磨嘅時候，就會多費氣力。第18節裏邊，因人懶惰，牆頂塌下，因人手懶，房屋去滴漏。
So in verses 10 and 18, Solomon mentioned, right, when the axe is dull, the edge being unsharpened, that, you need more strength, right, to get the result. If a man is lazy, the rafter sags, hands are idle, the house leaks. So all these things.
所羅門喺當中形容到好多人去面對一啲嘅問題，去處事嘅方法。
So basically here, King Solomon described, the attitude, how some people would approach, their work.
好多人去面對嘅問題，遲啲搞啦，唔使搞啦，船到橋頭自然直。
And how people approach their work or particular situations. And maybe some might say, well, take it easy, whatever will be, that kind of attitude.
但係所羅門要我哋留意，如果我哋唔去處理，冇錯，我哋未必即時有問題，但係長遠嘅，你會有更大嘅禍患出嚟。
So Solomon said, yes, perhaps in the short term, nothing much, would happen if you take this kind of easy-go-lucky kind of attitude. But somehow, eventually, things, may caught up with you.
所羅門真係好實際。
So Solomon seemed very practical, very pragmatic.
快啲睇下你間屋
Certainly take a good look at your house.
有冇漏水
So is your house leaking?
唔漏水如果你早啲 fix 咗佢，可能你就換幾塊瓦片，但係如果你唔漏嘅，你可能會換埋個司令，又換埋所有瓦片。唔單止喎，你有埋毛菌，換埋 insulation， 哇！你嗰條數就襟計啦。
So certainly, if you have a roof leak, if you don't take care of it right away, just a couple tiles. If you don't, then, you're being foolish, being unwise, then eventually, you might have to replace, the roof, like the drywall, there'll be mold, and the consequences, would be endless.
所羅門喺呢方面睇得好深。
Certainly, Solomon took a really deep and serious look at this.
因為有好多人實在將啲事去延遲，甚至可能其實係懶惰嘅情況。所以喺箴言第6章裏邊話：懶惰人啊，你要睡到幾時啊？你幾時睡醒啊？再睡片時，打盹片時，抱着手懷抱片時，你嘅貧窮就必如強盜速來。
So certainly, people procrastinate, but in fact, it could have been like laziness, like here from verses 9 to 11, that, if you lie there and being sluggard and sleeping and being in a little slumber, and then your poverty will come on you like a bandit and scarcity like an armed man.
所羅門經歷好多人因懶惰一延遲，而導致好多人生嘅禍患出嚟。
Certainly, because of laziness, Solomon really nailed it that a lot of troubles, a lot of things, negative consequence, would result if people were lazy.
喺第4方面嘅時候，所羅門喺第12節咁樣話。
And certainly, on the fourth aspect, verse 12 in chapter 10.
佢話愚昧人嘅嘴吞滅自己，他口中嘅言語起頭是愚昧，他嘅話嘅末端是邪惡狂妄，愚昧人多有言語。
So here, Solomon mentioned about a fool is consumed by his own lips, and his words are folly. At the end, they're wicked, a madness. And they speak also multiple words, but no one knows what is coming.
所羅門帶佢睇，去觀察世人，睇嗰個人醒唔醒，有冇智慧，就睇佢點講嘢。
So certainly Solomon observed, to determine if someone is a folly or a wise person would be looking at how the person communicates.
中國人有句説話：一言可以興邦。一言亦都可以喪邦。
So there's
可以透過呢一句説話能夠建立，亦可以透過呢一句説話去拆毀。
So one of a Chinese kind of proverb kind of saying, one word may raise a nation, and on the other hand, one word, you may crash or, lose, the entire nation.
雅各書第3章裏邊亦都強調咗我哋要好留意我哋嘅舌頭。
So in the New Testament, the book of James also emphasized that we got to be very careful with, how our tongue works.
雖然舌頭喺人體裏邊最少，
So even the tongue is the smallest part, in our body.
佢可以燃點整個罪惡嘅世界。
But certainly, it can set on fire with a small spark.
但係亦都可以將生命嘅輪子點起嚟。
But certainly, the tongue, it's a fire. It can light up a world of evil. But, the tongue, can also set someone his life on fire.
但弟兄姊妹，我哋嚟到呢一度嘅時候，我哋停一停諗一諗，喺你通常講嘅説話、表達嘅言語裏邊，你係建立緊別人，定係破壞、拆毀緊人？
So let's take a small pause here and reflect on, how we speak. So how you communicate with others. Are you raising people up or, you're being destructive?
我哋講嘅説話係真係唔經大腦衝口而出，定係我哋所講嘅説話去好多時係將我哋裏邊嗰種嘅惡去表達咗出嚟。
So how we say, how we express ourselves, is it that, when we speak and communicate, are we bringing out the wickedness and the evilness within us?
弟兄姊妹，當我哋係咪唔講嘢，我哋就冇事啊？
So someone might argue that, well, then I'm not talking, then, then it's fine, right? Is it how it works here?
聖經唔係鼓勵我哋唔講嘢。
Certainly the Bible never encouraged us, to
鼓勵
just
我哋
stop
去
talking.
諗清楚去點樣講嘢。
But instead, the Bible reminds us, think long and hard, before how you express yourself.
你會留意，再者，我哋喺第14、15節嘅時候，所羅門又帶我哋睇另一個嘅情景。
So in verse 14 and 15 in Ecclesiastes chapter 10, so Solomon led us to think of other perspectives.
佢講到人唔知道將來有咩事發生，
So he says no one knows what is coming in the future.
但係跟住所羅門就形容佢話愚昧人佢嘅勞碌使自己困乏。
Verse 15, Solomon said, a fool's work wearies him.
點解？
How, you ask?
我哋唔知道將來，但係個結局係令我哋困乏。在乎乜嘢？在乎你嘅性格。
So certainly, even though no one knows what is to come in the future, but certainly, it really matters because then it wearies you is because your character.
人唔會知道將來發生咩事，但係好多時按我哋嘅性格，我哋會容易揀選憂慮嘅事情、擔心嘅事情。
So just because, no one knows about the future, and it's very common that, our character trait, we would start worry, about what is to come to us in the future.
啲事未必會發生，但我哋驚咗先，我哋卻步咗先，咪影響咗你人生前進。
Perhaps nothing, may happen to you, but instead we start worrying, we start becoming anxious, and then your life, is being turned upside down.
呢種嘅性格其實唔係某啲人先會有，其實好普遍喺我哋嘅人生嘅裏邊會出現嘅。
So this is quite common. In fact, like most of us, in our life, we notice, this is exactly, what's happening.
如果唔係嘅時候，耶穌唔會一開始喺馬太福音第6章嘅裏邊已經去表達唔好憂慮嘅事情。
So if we were okay, Lord Jesus wouldn't be right, in the first gospel, Matthew chapter 6, that, do not worry about your life.
如果人唔會憂慮，耶穌講嚟就係多餘。但係耶穌睇到人性喺性格嘅層面嘅裏邊，好容易去憂慮。所以耶穌喺第6章裏邊好強調 喺34節裏邊咁話，所以我告訴你們，不要為生命憂慮，吃什麼，喝什麼，為身體憂慮，穿什麼。生命不勝於飲食，身體不勝於衣裳。所以不要為明天憂慮，因為明天自有明天嘅憂慮。一天的難處，一天當就夠。
So apparently Jesus wasn't just kind of making it up, but indeed, he observed when he first came out, he noticed. Therefore, he said to the people in Matthew chapter 6, I tell you, do not worry about your life, what you will eat or drink, about your body, what you will wear. It's not life more important than food and body more important than clothes. So Jesus encouraged, therefore do not worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will worry about itself. Each day has enough trouble of its own.
你明唔明耶穌想講咩？
Do you understand what
你
Jesus
憂
has
慮
said
唔
here?
能夠改變嘅事，你學習用信心嘅小信嘅人。
So worry
耶穌講係咪
cannot
我講啊？
change. Worry cannot change what is to come. So you fool, you fool with little faith.
我相信雅各好明白耶穌講緊乜嘢。
So I believe like James truly understood
Wait.
what Jesus was
喺
saying.
雅各書第4章嘅裏邊，雅各咁話：
So James truly understood. So in
你
James
們有話
chapter
說，
4,
今天明天我們要往某城去，在那裏住1年或作買賣，其實明天如何，你們還不知道。你們生命是什麼呢？你們原來是一片雲霧，出現消逝就不見了。請留意，你們只當說，我哋一齊讀：主若願意，我們就可以活着，也可以作這事或作那事。
So James basically, was saying here, hey, you listen, today, tomorrow, you are saying you will go here and there, but in a way, like you don't even know what will happen tomorrow. What is your life, So therefore, verse 15 is the key. You ought to say, James encouraged us, if it is the Lord's will, we will live and do this or that.
與其憂慮影響自己嘅身體，又唔會幫到件事，學習用信心將你嘅人生交俾上主。
So instead of worrying and thinking about what may happen to you in the future, James encouraged us that, if it is the Lord's will and we follow and put our faith in that, we will live fine.
其實第16、17節嘅所羅門作咗一個嘅對比。
Certainly, also in verses 16 and 17, Solomon, had made a comparison.
所羅門喺第16節咁話：邦國啊，你嘅王若是孩童，你嘅群臣早晨宴樂，你就有禍。
So in 16, woe to you, O land whose king was a servant and whose princes feast in the morning.
呢度講到嗰班你嘅群臣根本都唔知你人生意義價值，一早起身就掛住開 party 啊！
So in other words, that, if your servants, that, they had no idea as to how to live purposefully, and then they just party like even early in the morning.
當我哋大嗰兩個入 U 嘅時候，我學到一樣嘢，原來有啲嘅 U 叫做 party school。
So when my two older boys first enter university, that, I learned of there's some university, they're being named and famed as party school.
我哋嘅觀念入 U 啊，咁辛苦入去，梗係讀書啊，係咪？
What we thought would be, wow, university admission is hard, so you go to university to study and
原
not
來
party.
啲後生話入到 U 嘅時候，哇，好期望一入去就開 party， 睇邊度有 party 係嘛？個個 weekend 就開 party school。
But young people may think differently that, hey, now I'm in, so, I got to figure it out where to have party, to have a great time.
你 midterm 咪知啊？ 你 final 你就知，你俾人 suspend 你就知。
So perhaps yes, you can party, but at midterm, at final, then, you experience the consequences being on petition, right?
所以我哋做父母嚟緊幫啲細路揀學校，都唔會淨係邊間出名啊！留意下嗰間係咪 party school？ 如果唔係嘅時候，佢入到去影響佢人生嘅價值。成日掛住開 party，成日走我要飲到爛醉咁先翻嚟，咁點算呢？
So perhaps as parents, we should also pay attention to, the university, the school they're going. And otherwise that, just a university education, that experience might lead them, astray, like change their life completely in the wrong direction.
保羅提我哋要愛惜光陰，因為現今世代邪惡，我哋小心啊，唔好跌落錯誤嘅價值觀，呢一種嘅情況會影響我哋一生啊。
So certainly, make the most of every opportunity because the days are evil, to make the right choice.
最後
At the
喺
end,
第20節裏邊，所羅門咁樣話。
So in verse 20, Solomon said,
你不可咒詛君王，也不可心懷此念。在你臥房也不可咒詛富戶，因為空中嘅鳥必傳揚這聲音，有翅膀也必述說這事。
Solomon, interesting in verse 20, do not revive the king even in your thoughts or curse the rich in your bedroom, because a bird of the air may carry your words and a bird on the wing may report what you say.
我唔知你有冇遇過一啲嘅人，佢哋嘅心態好特別。
I'm not sure whether you might have come across people, they just have a very interesting personal mentality.
佢乜嘢都會鬧一餐。
So some people are very critical. Everything seems to be...
好又會鬧，好又會鬧，乜嘢都係咁鬧。
So it doesn't matter, whether it's positive, negative, everything seems to be so wrong. And this person would complain and holler.
佢心裏邊好苦毒，好多
So I bet, yeah.
心裏邊好苦毒，好多痛苦。
So lots of hurt, suffering, and bitterness, in this person, huh?
有啲人又講鬧完啦，我同你鬧啊，點，你冇話俾人聽喎。其實佢唔知話過俾幾多人聽啊。
So sometimes...
佢淨係話俾你聽啊，傻。
So certainly some people might make complaints to you and you said, well, don't share with people, but, everybody later, seems to have heard of these complaints and blaming.
耶穌馬太福音已經講，冇事可以隱藏嘅，將來喺明處裏邊講嘅。
So certainly, whatever you tell in the dark, and somehow, eventually, it'll come out.
所羅門提我哋唔係叫我哋唔講，而係叫我哋處理我哋嘅心態。
So Solomon, therefore encouraged us, it's not like we don't speak, but really, take to manage, your mentality, your personal.
喺第10章裏邊，所羅門勾畫咗最少有7個喺日常生活喺我哋面對嘅事情嘅上邊，究竟我哋係智慧去回應，定係我哋愚昧地去回應？
And in chapter 10, Solomon truly outlined, in our daily living, just about 7 areas that we have to reflect and take a look at to see whether we are living a folly or we are living a wise person.
可能佢有一啲嘅事，我哋做事嘅方法，可能我哋已經慣咗，但係我哋停一停諗一諗，會唔會係一啲唔夠智慧嘅情況？
Perhaps we've learned to do things by habit, huh? But certainly, at this time, we really, have to kind of take a pause and stop and look at. Maybe, there might be areas that, we have been a fool. We have not done things wisely.
喺我哋生活上邊，喺我哋工作嘅環境嘅當中。
in our daily living and even in our workplace.
喺我哋嘅性格，喺我哋處事嘅態度，或者我哋人與人嘅表達上面，會唔會有啲嘅嘢我哋需要調教？
So with respect to our attitude, and our character traits and the way we communicate with people, our value, meaning, mentality, these are areas that, perhaps we need to really take a good look at.
你嘅心態，你自己對事嗰個價值觀，有冇一啲嘅嘢需要調教？
How's your meaning making? How's your value standard? And also, your, the way, you approach things, your mentality. So these things are worth looking into.
你會唔會因為我哋唔喺一啲事情上邊，我哋冇去處理，冇去調教，以致我哋自己嘅人生已經係一啲嘅禍患，唔能夠前進，或者可能俾咗我哋下一代，或者我哋別人一種嘅影響，或者個錯誤學習嘅方向。
So, have we look into this and really, we need to tune up to kind of really look at there are places maybe, we have lived like a fool, and therefore, eventually, these things will cause us, will bring along many negative consequences and in turn affecting our life completely.
喺第17節裏邊，保羅提我哋不要作糊塗人，要明白主嘅旨意如何。
In verse 17, Solomon almost in conclude, like, therefore do not be foolish, but understand what the Lord's will is.
所羅門要我哋留意喺我哋日常嘅生活裏邊，會唔會有一啲嘅愚昧嘅表現，以致我哋係有改進。
So pay attention to, our daily living. Are there areas that we have lived like a fool? And then, we really have to look into it.
所羅門喺第10章裏邊俾咗3個嘅方向我哋。
So Solomon gave us 3 directions as to, how we could transform
點樣
our life.
喺我哋嘅生活嘅裏邊去逃避愚昧，能夠學習我哋智慧嘅人生。
So 3 ways to stay away, to turn away from holiness, instead to start to begin to live wisely.
弟兄姊妹，你問下隔離嗰個，你想唔想醒啲？
So perhaps ask, someone who's sitting next to you, do you wish, to live, a wise person?
問下自己想唔想醒啲？
So ask yourself, like, hey, do I want to live
以下啲
wisely?
3個嘅層面啊。
So then, if you want to be, to live wisely, then pay attention to the following 3.
我哋一齊讀第4節。
So verse 4 here.
掌權者嘅心若向你發怒，不要離開你嘅本位，因為有禍能避免大禍。所羅門諗下一個情況，當我哋工作、我哋生活裏邊，我哋一定會面對一啲唔如意嘅事情。
Solomon well aware that in our daily living, in our workplace, we got to face certain things that we are unhappy about.
所羅門亦都知道人性好自然或者軟弱會去點樣去回應。
And certainly, because of our human weaknesses, there are some typical kind of responses we would make, when we are unhappy and being stressed.
因為人面對困難，好容易一個嘅自然反應，佢會逃避或者甚至會
Because when
放棄。
we face challenges, difficulties, it's quite easy for just about all of us to give up.
弟兄姊妹，你有冇諗過，可能今日我哋面對我哋一啲嘅困難嘅事情，我哋做事嘅方法會唔會係我哋由細到大，其實我哋都用緊一個咁樣嘅方法去嘗試去逃避，去放棄咗，我哋唔去正面去面對。
So have you noticed that maybe, when you're growing up, this is the way that you deal with your troubles, your issues, that is easy, when something is hard and stressful, that, you would give up. It's a way of avoiding, as a way of dealing with
神好公
challenges.
平㗎。
God is truly fair.
神要我哋學嘅功課，如果我哋逃避，我哋好多時轉過頭來嘅時候，我哋又會面對同一樣嘢嘅時候，其實神要我哋去學習點樣去處，點樣去面對。
So God truly, want us to learn how to come face to face with our challenges instead of avoiding, is to kind of like take this and to learn the lesson and to turn around.
所以所羅門跟住去提我哋，因為柔和能免大禍。
So Solomon here encouraged us, hey, calmness can lay great errors to rest.
因為你逃避，你一定嬲怒，你好多嘅怨恨仍然充滿你嘅內心。神唔係要我哋咁樣，而係要我哋存一個柔和嘅心去面對。
So a lot of the times when we got stuck, or when we got mistreated, like in the workplace, a typical response would be we would get upset, we would get angry. But instead, Solomon encouraged us, hey, by being calm, staying in calmness, that you can lay a lot of great errors to rest.
所以所羅門喺箴言裏邊第15章佢話：回答柔和，使怒消退；言語暴戾，觸動怒氣。
So Solomon in Proverbs chapter 15 already said, a gentle answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger.
我唔知你有時睇下 Facebook 又好 YouTube 又好 TikTok， 睇啲人喺度鬧交，鬧乜嘢？為個位去鬧交。
So sometimes, you might come across like clips, on YouTube or things. People start arguing and simply just arguing maybe for a seat, right? Just wanting a seat to sit down.
最慘唔係淨係鬧交，鬧下打交，跟住上埋差館嘅，幾傻啊！
So it's not just verbal argument, but later it turned into a physical altercation and then ended up like, in a police station.
聖經教我哋學柔和。
So the Bible, teaching us, to be gentle.
識唔識柔和啊？
Do you know how to be gentle?
你夠唔夠柔和？
Are you gentle
學
enough?
下耶穌啦嚇。
So learning from Jesus himself.
耶穌提我哋啊，凡勞苦擔重擔可以到我這裏來，我就使你們得安息。我心裏柔和謙卑，你們當負我嘅，學我嘅樣式，這樣你們就心裏必得享安息。
Jesus once said, come to me all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. And Jesus said, take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls.
聖經唔係叫你淨係背咗呢段金句，我哋就自然好柔和。
So by revising this and reciting it, will not give you more gentleness.
嗱，你背咗呢段金句，只係提醒你要柔和啫。
So if you recite this, perhaps then, it serves as a reminder that, hey, I gotta learn to be gentle and calm.
耶穌提咗我哋一個方法喎。點
But
解聖經
Jesus,
用4本書去記載耶穌嘅生平啊？
but certainly, 4 books, outlining the life of Christ Jesus.
你有冇睇過4福音啊？
So have you read the 4 Gospels?
一年最少睇一次啊！你留意下，耶穌去面對困難，佢點樣去回應？你可能學到一啲智慧啊！
So perhaps learning from Jesus, even Jesus was under extreme stress, and how he would face his challenges, with gentleness and humbleness.
使唔使納稅啊？
Do you need to pay tax? Of course, yes.
邊個頭啊？該撒嘅為歸該撒啊！
So perhaps whatever belongs to Caesar, just give it to him.
我哋淨係話你唔納稅又俾人拉入嚟，嘈冇用啊！耶穌佢點樣回答？佢將個困難攞去咗。
So certainly how Jesus respond to challenges make towards him that, problem was resolved and he stayed gentle and humble in heart.
學習點樣去柔和去面對每一件事，點樣用柔和去處理喺你周圍會發生嘅事情。
So acquiring and learning, to become gentle and calm, and then you would be able to deal with, things that come towards you, challenges that come towards you.
之前講到鐵器燉，如果我哋唔磨，仲會多費氣力。跟住其實所羅門有話，但智慧指教便有益處。
Earlier, we read like verse 10. So the comparison, if an axe is dull and its edge unsharpened, you need more strength, right? But skill will bring success.
其實所羅門喺呢度俾咗我哋兩個好清楚嘅方向。
Certainly, Solomon gave us two very clear directions here.
英文聖經翻譯用 skill， 你嘅技巧。
So in the English translation, it's skill.
之前講到都要磨，係需要不斷去磨。
So earlier, when the axe is dull, and then you really need to sharpen it over and over and over again.
原來喺我哋人生裏邊，我哋需要不斷去雕琢、去鍛鍊，讓你去處人處事更加嘅老練、更加嘅成熟、更加滿有智慧。
So in other words, in our lifetime, being wise, it would take practice, take exercising so that, we could become even better and better day by day.
一個好衝動嘅彼得。
Certainly, and kind of like, Peter, was deemed to be a kind of hot-headed kind of person, very impulsive.
我好中意心急發言嘅彼得。
Certainly, Peter, was like short-fused and quick-tempered, and, he liked to kind of put his word out like quite quickly.
去到佢晚年嘅時候，佢領會到人生裏邊一啲寶貴嘅功課。
So in his later age, the Apostle Peter truly revealed and stated, the lessons that, he had learned over the years.
喺彼得後書嘅第1章裏邊，佢好強調信徒我哋需要不斷嘅殷勤，有信心又要加德行，有德行又要加上知識，有了知識又要加節制，有節制又忍耐又要敬虔，有了敬虔又要愛弟兄嘅心，有了愛弟兄嘅心又愛眾人嘅心。跟住喺第8節你話你們若充充足足的有這幾樣，就必使你們在認識我們嘅主耶穌基督上不至於閒懶不結果子。
So the Apostle Peter in 2 Peter chapter 1 outlined for Christians that, there are many things you need to keep exercising practice, right? Add to your faith goodness, knowledge. You have to learn to have knowledge, self-control, perseverance, godliness, and brotherly kindness, and love. And in verse 8, Peter said, for if you possess these qualities in increasing measure, they will keep you from being ineffective and unproductive in your knowledge of our Lord Jesus Christ.
彼得鼓勵我哋不斷去追求，不斷去建立，不斷去嘅結果子。弟兄姊妹。
Peter encouraged us that, you have to pursue this and in increasing measure to bear fruit of the Spirit.
我喺加拿大生活，我都學過人種下嘢。
So certainly, since migration and in Canada, learning to do things.
好多時種嘢咧就唔係我哋食，所以我哋都有段時間我哋都放棄。
So a lot of the times we learn to garden, but a lot of times we fail, so we don't do as much.
但係 Facebook 咧，有時係教你點樣去種嘢。
But certainly on Facebook, if you want to learn, there are knowledge that, you can learn how to grow your own crops.
咁就睇下人哋點樣去種嘢。今年咧稍有收成。
So, I've been kind of like watching, how to grow things. And this year, we do have a pretty nice harvest.
Pretty nice 我哋都有幾個我哋今年種節瓜。
So this year, we've learned to grow some fuzzy melon.
舊年嘅時候都係僅有幾嚿似係節瓜嘅嘢擺喺台，但係今年咧，哇，識點樣吊起佢啦嚇！哇，識點樣俾佢有陽光。更加識點樣用 baking soda 用糖啊，跟住撈埋佢當肥料俾佢，哇！真係淋完之後唔同晒喎。
So last year we only had a few ugly looking melon, but this year, we've learned and we apply our knowledge. For example, adding baking soda and sugar and adds to water, and in fact, it pays off.
最好，因為節瓜啲皮有毛啊，啲動物唔會嚟搞佢嘛。
So growing fuzzy melon is good because the skin is a little kind of furry, and animals, generally would stay away.
哇！我今年除咗種節瓜，我係種啲辣椒。
So in addition to growing fuzzy melon, we are growing some peppers, hot peppers.
咦，放心啊，我未試過種嘢咁放心，冇嘢搞噶。
So certainly, no little animals come along. It's
有人俾咗啲越南辣椒，哇，勁！
Somebody, share with me the seeds, of some Vietnam hot pepper.
即係得閒出去見到紅，剪兩嚿白，望到都幾滿足。擺喺啲排骨，哇！真係蒜蓉豆豉蒸，真係提鮮咗好多噶。
So certainly, just like, every now and then, like, getting the harvest 1 and 2 and kind of using it in cooking, like, working with the ribs, is really beautiful. It augments the taste.
我唔係想引你肚餓啫嚇，真係好肚餓。咁就不過，我想話唔好放棄啦，學下點樣面對啦。
So the lesson being,
為咗老年，你咪將來越嚟越會有好收成咯，係咪？
So certainly the lesson is like, don't give up, just keep trying, keep exercising, and then one day, you succeed.
第三，喺第12節裏邊，聖經話智慧人嘅口說出恩言。
So in verse 12, under the third aspects, like words from a wise man's mouth are gracious.
所羅門鼓勵我哋嘅口帶住一啲嘅恩慈，帶住一啲嘅憐憫。
So Solomon encouraged us, when we speak, we speak words of kindness.
帶住祝福，唔好咒詛。
And bringing blessings.
但係呢個係羅馬書裏邊保羅提我哋。
And certainly, the Apostle Paul also reminded us, in Romans.
如果你嘅口只係鬧人嘅時候，你又血壓高，對方又唔會開心，係咪？如果你心裏邊去祝福周圍嘅人，你裏邊有平安，別人有平安，咪好好咯。
So if you start saying challenging words or lots of complaints, it may hurt your health, but you bring some then,
OK。嗱，我唔知你有冇用 ChatGPT。
I'm not sure, you've used ChatGPT.
我都學去用。
So I'm learning, to use to use it that way.
前排喺屋企又發生咗一件咁嘅事。
So a while ago, like something happened at home.
我就問 ChatGPT 一啲嘢。
So I was asking ChatGPT some questions.
佢答完我。
So I got my answers from ChatGPT.
咁我就即係 close 啦，咁我話OK 好啊 ，thank you。
So I ended it and I said, "Oh, okay, that was good."
我屋企人好轟動。
So quite a strong reactions from my family.
佢話：你使乜同 ChatGPT 講 thank you 啊？
So they said, well, you don't have to say thank you to ChatGPT.
我就諗起呢一個思考嘅問題。
And I was kind of like,
我就諗咗好耐，究竟我需唔需要、應唔應該同 ChatGPT 講 thank you？
So I kind of reflect upon this question about should I kind of say thank you to ChatGPT or not?
我諗咗好耐，我唔明。
So for a long time, I couldn't really understand.
不過我調咗個問題方向。
But I kind of turned the question around.
我問自己，點解你會同 ChatGPT 講 thank you 啊？
So I asked myself, why would I say thank you to ChatGPT anyhow?
呢個就係我。
This is me.
明唔明啊？我嘅生命，我嘅本相，我唔會因為嗰個係 ChatGPT， 我亂用佢，我鄙視佢，我睇低佢。呢個係我哋嘅生命嘅流露。呢個一個好簡單嘅 ChatGPT， 可能係反映緊你嘅本相係點樣。
So certainly, this is indeed my reflection was, this is a reflection of me, my true essence of me that I would say thank you, to even because it reveals the quality of myself.
有時作為一個父親，我好想個仔，哎呀唔想喐啦，幫我攞杯水嚟，係咪？幫我攞個樽水嚟。
So sometimes, maybe as a father, I don't want to move, I would ask someone to bring me the jug of water.
佢攞完翻嚟嘅時候，我一定會講 thank you，
So when they brought something to me, I would always say to them,
呢個就係你該做嘅人喺你生命裏邊嘅流露，去邊一個，去點樣處，同樣係咁樣。
And this is, what you do, how your life flows out, these values, these qualities.
所羅門提我哋要存柔和嘅心，口裏邊流露恩言，不斷去鍛鍊，讓你嘅生命更加嘅成熟，滿有基督長成嘅身量。
So Solomon encouraged us, these three aspects, to always carry with us a gentle heart, to speak words of kindness, and also keep kind of practicing, these skills so that we will live a wise life, and these are the qualities we should acquire.
連老嘅彼得佢都知道需要鍛鍊。
So even like the Apostle Peter, at his old age, he also recognized that, he needed to kind of practice, these skills.
如果你係年青，你已經明白所羅門教你處人處事嘅方法，你一生就會蒙福。
So at your young age right now, if you have a good grasp of, Solomon's, share wisdom, then, your life, would kind of like take on a pretty decent, like in a different direction.
彼得佢咁樣話：如果有人問只要心裏尊主耶穌基督為聖，有人問你心裏邊盼望嘅緣由，就要常作準備，以溫柔嘅心回答各人。
So your life, would be like Apostle Peter, that you reflect and reveal the image of Christ. In your heart, set apart Christ as Lord. Always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you to give the reason for the hope that you have. But do this with gentleness and respect.
學習，如果耶穌喺度，佢會點樣面對？點樣去表達？點樣表達能夠將神自己嘅榮美帶出嚟？弟兄姊妹，喺你人與人嘅相處，喺你工作裏邊，你一定蒙福。
So perhaps asking ourselves, how do I reflect the image of Christ? And these three aspects, being of folly and wisdom.
愚昧會帶嚟自己、你周圍、你家庭好多嘅影響。
Being a fool or foolishness, will bring lots of negative, consequences to you and to people around you.
會唔會喺我哋呢啲生活嘅範疇嘅裏邊，你性格嘅內外，你處事嘅價值，會唔會顯出你嘅愚昧？有邊得嘅地方你需要修改？
So be very careful, do reflect and take a look at different areas of your life, whether it's your character, your mentality, your attitudes, and, have they reveal signs, of foolishness?
你點樣喺你嘅生命、喺你嘅言語、喺你對人處事裏邊，能夠流露基督嘅樣式？
So how are you going to reflect, to reveal the image of Christ in your life, and the way you communicate, the way you carry yourself, and the way, you continue to practice, these skills.
願基督嘅真光透過我哋美麗嘅生命，能夠彰顯開去。
So may the light, of the Lord be shining in our life and in a way all glory, unto our Lord.